started. So my name is Seth Johnson. I'm an employee of Bluehost, and they've graciously allowed me to come here and speak to you today. And they're a sponsor, so that's great. Today's talk is Open About Being Closed Redux. For those of you who were here last year, there are going to be a lot of things that are the same. We're going to talk about some open source tools and a couple that aren't, because I couldn't not include them at this stage, that can help you to manage your online privacy, and some things that I've learned since giving this talk last year. So first of all, St. Con is coming up. It's going to be October 27th through the 30th at Weber State. Registration is not yet open, but it will be shortly, so keep checking back for that. If you're interested in security and privacy related things, it's a great conference to go to. So let's talk a little bit about why privacy matters. Last year we talked a little bit about this. Why does privacy matter to you?
I should be able to make the choices.
You want to be able to make the choices? Okay. Anyone else? Yes?
You have blinds on your windows.
What, do you have blinds on your windows?
Anyone here not wearing clothes?
Okay.
You're not letting everyone see everything, right?
Sure. Any other ideas? Why does privacy matter? Like, why do you care?
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind?
It will be used
Because it's none of your business.
Because it's none of your business? Okay, yeah. I mean, obviously all of those things are great reasons. And what it comes down to is being able to make that kind of choice where you can. And so today what I want to talk about is a little bit about why it matters, but a lot about how you can make that choice for yourself. So, oh, look, it looks great up there. How many of you saw this news article? How many of you use Facebook? Shame on you. I mean, no, Facebook tracks people that don't even use Facebook, right? Because they can. How many of you have seen the Facebook like buttons everywhere on the internet? Yeah, they're tracking you. And they're good at it. They're tracking people who aren't using Facebook because they can, and they call it a bug, and you know, we're so sorry. We're just going to keep doing what we do. So I think there's one more reason why privacy is really important, and that is it's not just Facebook, it's not just Google, it's not just Apple who's accumulating all this information. It's also people who have less desirable motivations, more nefarious kinds of things, and also the people who attack these kinds of entities. What would happen if Facebook got hacked and got all of your information that you posted on Facebook? Could it be bad? Probably. Would it be worse if they got all the records that Facebook has on every site you've ever visited? Could be a little bit scary. All right, so the first tool in your open source arsenal for privacy is Firefox. How many of you use Google Chrome? Shame on you. This is an open source conference. Just to help you out, if you let me Google that for you, Google privacy issues, you can see all the Google privacy issues, and some that are related to Chrome and some that aren't. Google does not have your privacy in mind, and Firefox does. Google has very deep interests in advertising and tracking where you go. And it stands to reason that they're using their tools to do that very thing, and there are lots of analysis and such on that kind of thing. So I would recommend Firefox. Google Chrome is a good browser, and it's better than a lot of them out there, but it's not the best thing for your privacy. Next, last time we talked about Lightbeam and Collusion. How many of you have used Lightbeam or Collusion? 3 of you. Okay. This is an example of how Lightbeam can show you. You go to some news site or something, and it will show you all the different branches that come off of the site that you're visiting, of all the little trackers. Maybe a lot of you in this audience are probably developers and have opened up like the network tab for your developer tools or Firebug or something, and you have seen when you go to a website that you have a zillion other requests for other websites, Google Analytics and all kinds of other things. The Lightbeam and Collusion add-ons for Firefox and Google Chrome and possibly others kind of give you a representation of how this information is being distributed, where the requests are coming from. One of the things that I've noticed in my usage of the internet is that very often the page that I visit will load one thing, and that one thing will load other things, and those other things will load other things, and it just keeps branching out until you're being tracked by 30, 40 different sites just by going to CNN.com or something like that. And it's on almost every site on the internet. So a lot of sites are doing those kinds of things, and Lightbeam and Collusion give you this kind of a view into that. With that being said, knowing that that's there is great, but you should also be able to do something about it. So one of the ad softwares out there that's open source is called Adblock Plus. It's an add-on for your browser, and it essentially takes the web content that you have coming in from a web page and makes the ads stop before they actually reach you, which is kind of cool. The benefits of this, in addition to not actually seeing the ads over here on this, is that it makes your internet experience much faster because you don't have to go to all those different places and you don't get tracked by all of those ad services. So Adblock Plus is really cool. It also has a bunch of different lists. There are some concerns about Adblock Plus and some of the other clones of that software in the way that they use your information and potentially allow certain ads to go through. Most of them have the ability for you to configure them to the way that you would like and to opt out of certain features that allow some of the advertisers through, but you should certainly look into that. I've found the most success with the Adblock Plus add-on. The next one is Disconnect. How many of you use Disconnect or heard me talk about it last year? It is really cool. Disconnect is an open source project, and it kind of displays a little bit of this if you set that up. But the main display is this thing right here. And it shows you all the Facebook things that are on a certain page, all the Google things and the Twitter things, and then all the advertising requests, analytics, and social, and content. And you can whitelist a site or whatever, and you can have a counter to see how cool you are by blocking all of these things. The majority of what Disconnect is trying to do is not only stop this, but make your internet experience faster. And because they're open source, they rely primarily on donations instead of ad revenue to be able to fund their projects. So if you like Disconnect, you should use it, and you should also help to finance that. Another add-on is Privacy Badger, which we were going to talk about just, I guess, Addy talked about earlier. Our friends at the EFF, Cooper Quentin, and a number of other people have been working really hard on Privacy Badger to make it a viable add-on for your browser so that you can take a little bit more control over what you're trying to do, and also to put a little bit of pressure on companies to think about the way that they are tracking you and the exposure that you are getting just by visiting their websites. One of the interesting things about Privacy Badger is that it was born out of the failed Do Not Track experiment. How many of you remember the Do Not Track experiment? Your browser has a little setting where you can say Do Not Track. And did anybody ever care about that? The consumers did, right? And the company said, oh, you're telling us you don't want us to track you? That doesn't matter. We'll just track you anyway. We're going to look for some special setting to turn that off. And so no one actually used it. And as a result, the EFF put together this tool called Privacy Badger. They're still working on it, and it's getting drastically better. It wasn't fantastic last year. It's significantly better now. And here's an example of Privacy Badger on Lifehacker. How many of you used Lifehacker? Read some of the articles on there. So they've got a bunch of different things. And some of these green ones are people who use better privacy policies. For example, Kinja, who owns Lifehacker, and some of the other things that they track, like DoubleClick, which happens to be Google. Do you have a question? Okay. Let's see. The next one, this one is not open source, but I had to include it. How many of you used Gostrey?
I used it, but I don't think it's in development anymore.
It's not in development anymore?
I don't think so.
Interesting. I'm pretty sure that it is.
Huh. Maybe I don't know.
they're still working on solving a bug with the new electrolysis part of Firefox, but they're waiting for something. Anyway, Gostrey gives you kind of a different view and allows you to turn off by default all of the Twitter buttons and the Facebook buttons and the Google Plus buttons, and then you can activate them individually. It also stops a bunch of different media players and works a lot like disconnect. I actually use both of them simultaneously. In fact, you can probably see them up in the top of my browser here. Here's the disconnect one, and then the Gostrey one over here. And they play very well together. The next open source project I use for holding my passwords and keys and things like that is Keypass, or Keypass X for non-Windows distributions. It's really the best software that I have found for local storage for keeping your passwords. A lot of you probably use things like LastPass or 1Password, and those generally store your things in the cloud. As a privacy advocate, I'm not a great fan of storing those kinds of things in the cloud without having me control them. I'd like to have complete control of that. So I use Keypass, and Keypass allows you to store your passwords in a format like this. You have, the type of key that you want, you can put it in some kind of structure here, and you have a username, and you can have comments and passwords, and you can set up global auto type for things like that, so you can press some sort of keystroke and automatically log into services. There are some limitations to that, and a lot of it has to do with what kinds of hooks are built into the operating system, into the software that you're plugging it into. There are add-ons for your browsers that can extend the functionality of Keypass, and I found it to be a great piece of software that I can use to be able to keep control of my passwords. And I think we all know that using the same password for every service is a terrible idea. But being a human being and remembering hundreds or thousands of passwords is also a terrible idea. So we kind of need a place to store it. All of those things like LastPass and 1Password are great solutions if that works for you. If you would like to keep a little bit more control over it and have it encrypted by default on your local workstation, as well as being able to upload it to a cloud service, then Keypass might be the right thing for you. And then we need to talk about Truecrypt. I talked about Truecrypt last year. Truecrypt is great. It's so awesome. It allows you to encrypt a virtual file system, or in fact your entire file system. And it also gives you the ability to have a hidden volume inside of that, so that you can have some sort of deniability for certain data if you need it. And the problem with that is that after a while, this happened. How many of you remember this? The developers of Truecrypt, not long after we talked about this at last Openwest, just decided to post an announcement saying that Truecrypt was unsafe and removed all the ability to use it in their new versions and abandoned the project entirely. I don't know for sure what exactly they meant by saying that it wasn't secure or might contain bugs or something like that. There was an independent group who used crowdfunding to do an analysis of Truecrypt, and they found a couple of things that could be improved, but nothing that was incredibly or drastically problematic with Truecrypt. However, it's hard for me to say I would still recommend that you use Truecrypt, given that kind of disclosure by its authors. There are several forks of Truecrypt available today, and I don't know that I can recommend any of those either. One of the big challenges with Truecrypt as far as its status as an open source piece of software is the quirkiness of the license that its developers used. It's not a common license, it's one that they wrote themselves, and it makes it very challenging to be able to determine what the legal status of your ability to use that as open source software. Some of the newer ones like VeraCrypt, which is one of the forks of that, are planning to release their software using either like the MIT license or the GPL v2 license or something of that nature in an attempt to solve that. But in the end, it's really challenging to be able to say, here's a great piece of software that you can use to encrypt those kinds of things. And especially one of the greatest things that Truecrypt was truly unique at and did very well was that it did cross-platform usage. So I could create on my Mac a Truecrypt volume and hand it to someone who uses Windows or who uses Linux, and they could open it using Truecrypt on their platform. And that's generally the best way that I can think of that you would be able to transfer those kinds of files, to be able to encrypt them and send them to someone else, is you would want to be able to transfer it to someone using any operating system, which is great about Truecrypt, except you can't really use it very much anymore. So my solution is a different project, also open source, called AESCrypt. You can get it at this GitHub URL. And AESCrypt is a slightly different kind of encryption. It uses AES as its encryption mechanism, but unlike Truecrypt, it doesn't create volumes, it encrypts individual files. That's problematic if you have to encrypt hundreds or thousands of files. You might need to create some sort of archive to store all of those things inside of before you use AESCrypt. Also, AESCrypt doesn't have any kind of hidden volumes or anything. It doesn't have any kind of deniability. And depending on how you set everything up, it also doesn't necessarily encrypt the file name that you're using. So if you have like secret documents or top secret documents, don't impersonate me or whatever, and you encrypt it with this, someone could easily read that. So that's not necessarily the thing that this is best at. However, the AES algorithm is kind of a standard today for encryption. So you can definitely use that to encrypt individual files. And AESCrypt is cross-platform, so you can use it on Windows or Linux or Mac. Question? All right. Next one I want to talk about, Kali Linux and the LUKS, the Linux Unified Key Setup. How many of you have used this before? So the people at Kali Linux discovered that they had an issue with people who would confiscate their devices, and they couldn't be certain that they weren't compromised in any way. So what they did was they used the LUKS stuff, and this URL tells you the instructions on how to do it. They would set it up so that they would encrypt the entire drive and use an encryption key, and then take that encryption key and store it somewhere else, and delete it off the local workstation so it was impossible for someone to restore that without getting the key back. And if you store the key in the cloud or on a USB thumb drive and ship it separately or something, you can go through border crossings or whatever like the EFF would suggest and not have anyone messing with your data. You could potentially lose your data if they destroyed it, but you wouldn't necessarily have someone decrypting your data because it's encrypted and the only encryption key is not with that stuff. It's kind of like a two-factor authentication to open up your hard drive, which is actually a really genius idea. Next we've got Tor and Tails and Orbot. How many of you use Tor? Do you like it?
Slow, but
It's slow?
Gets the job done.
It gets the job done? What are the ways that you use Tor? Do you use the browser bundle or?
I do. I have a Raspberry Pi that runs a Tor Wi-Fi node, basically.
Okay.
So it just presents a Wi-Fi access point that's all through Tor.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great idea. There was actually a recent Kickstarter project to create a little Tor node. For those of you who aren't familiar with Tor, the way that it works, I'm going to thank the EFF for this little image. You take your Tor node and you connect to a bunch of Tor nodes. It randomly selects a path through here, and then the end node, the exit node, connects you to the thing that you want. But the only traffic that's unencrypted is the last hop, and so it's to some degree anonymous from here to here. Obviously, depending on how that's set up and whether or not someone controls your entry point and your exit point, which there's been some murmurings that perhaps that has been done by some groups, you're relatively anonymous through that Tor network. There are lots of different ways to use Tor, and the Tor browser bundle is just one of them. However, the moment you try to use something like Flash or Java or those kinds of things, or you do something outside of your browser, suddenly all of your anonymity is gone. The way to solve that particular thing is to use Tails. How many of you use Tails? So what's the difference between Tor and Tails? Go ahead.
Tails is a live distribution that all traffic is routed through Tor. It uses IP tables to block any traffic to ClearNet sites. It's also, since it's a live distro, everything is wiped when you shut down or reboot the system.
Right. So it's all of the information that you're accumulating while you're actually browsing or using the network is stored in some kind of volatile memory, and when you deactivate the working system that you've set up with Tails, it all goes away. That might be really important if you happen to be someone who has to deal with free speech issues or things like that, or if you're dealing with some very sensitive stuff. But it can also be a pain to use that if you want to have like bookmarks that you go to on a regular basis. Tails probably isn't the thing for you. And then Orbot is the one that you can use for things like Android, which is actually pretty cool if you can use that on your phone. You can have a higher degree of anonymity there. With things like both the AT&T and Verizon wireless services experimenting with injecting headers into your traffic, it is kind of valuable to be able to make that kind of a choice on your mobile traffic. Also, I didn't talk about this last time. I think it was available last time. There's another anonymous network called I2P. How many of you have used or heard of I2P? So it's a lot like Tor in that it's an anonymous network. It's kind of a bit of peer-to-peer networking, and the nodes kind of all act as peers, and the traffic mirrors this pattern, although this diagram is kind of challenging to follow. But it allows you to use peer-to-peer networking as your anonymizer. One of the benefits of using this is the decentralized nature of it. Tor makes a great deal of effort in trying to anonymize traffic and decentralize traffic, but I2P makes that a fundamental choice in their structure, and that gives them a little bit of a distinction in the way that they operate. One of the things that is a little bit challenging in using I2P is that it runs on Java, and the version of Java that it runs on is kind of tricky to install. So you might have some difficulty installing that. I certainly did, and being able to use it was kind of problematic for me.
It's also not meant to go to the clear net. It's really, you go into the net and the anonymized net. You know, where Tor is meant to allow you to get out into the normal network. Which
is absolutely true, yes. Other things, OpenSSL, kind of a big deal. We kind of think of SSL as the backbone of internet encryption, although it's pretty much TLS at this point. If you're still using SSL, you're in trouble. And then this happened, right? Heartbleed. How many of you patched your servers? Hopefully everyone. If you haven't, you've been hacked. There's not really any question about that. OpenSSL is a project that's been around for a lot of years, and the internet has kind of taken advantage of that and used it, and not necessarily helped that project along. But because of Heartbleed, suddenly a lot of funds started flowing into the OpenSSL project, and so things are hopefully getting a little bit better. Last time we also talked about LibreSSL, which is a fork of OpenSSL that the OpenBSD group is working on, and they have their OpenSSL Rampage.org site where they're talking about all the things that they're ripping out of OpenSSL because they think they're terrible. LibreSSL is now probably in a far more stable state. When we talked about this last year, LibreSSL was kind of I don't know, I would say a challenging thing to implement because of the lack of maturity in that particular thing. It's always, I would imagine, difficult to take a fairly mature project and start ripping things out that you think aren't so great and replacing them with better things or making it more bare bones and hoping that you still have an enterprise class kind of project. In this particular case, they had a couple of hiccups. A number of people released some news articles indicating that LibreSSL was like totally broken from the very beginning, and I don't know that any of those things were very founded, but currently the updates that are being put into LibreSSL are mostly copies of exactly what's happening in OpenSSL, and the number of bugs that have been found so far in LibreSSL is drastically smaller, and they're less critical bugs as well. I don't know that this is a great and stellar endorsement of LibreSSL, but it might be worth investigating for your environment to determine if that's the best thing for you. OpenVPN, one of the greatest things that we can do for our privacy is to connect through a VPN. There are two caveats that I would add to that. One is you really have to trust whoever you're connecting to through the VPN, because the VPN traffic is secure from end to end, but on either end of it, you have the same kinds of vulnerabilities. So if I connect to some particular server in Texas or whatever, then I really need to trust that my anonymity could be preserved by the person in Texas who's holding the VPN credentials that I'm using to connect with. The other thing is your privacy is a little bit misleading in VPN in that you can always tell if someone is using VPN. If you look at the traffic in Wireshark or any kind of network analyzer, you can tell that someone is using VPN to run their traffic, and that can be an indication of a lot of things, but it could merit some further investigation. So VPN is a great thing, but it's not necessarily the only thing that you should have in your arsenal, and OpenVPN is a great product. There's also the Prey project. How many of you use this? Just one of you, wow, okay. The Prey project is kind of like the Track My iPhone kind of thing for all kinds of mobile devices and other things, as well as desktop devices. And it's completely open source, which is actually really cool. It gives you a lot of different options. They've added a bunch of things since last time, and I would recommend it. I think that it's a great product. It's been used a lot. Last time we talked about Redphone and Text Secure. How many of you are Android users? All right, how many of you are iPhone users? Just a couple of you. So last time you guys were really sad because you couldn't use all of this awesomeness where you could do end-to-end encryption with Redphone. Well, it turns out that Signal is out now. So if you haven't downloaded Signal from the App Store, please go do it. It is essentially Redphone and Text Secure put into a single app for iOS. And the encryption on this is great. It works really well. I have used it on both kinds of devices. I've used it on an iPhone, I've used it on Android, and I've used it to connect between the two devices, and the networks are together now. I believe that at some point the Whisper Systems, the group that's creating this, is in the process of kind of merging the two products into Signal going forward, but I don't know for sure. Anyway, but it's fantastic. I've used it. The Redphone, I've also noticed, has a little bit of some issues with volume. The volume levels on some Android devices are lower than you would expect when you're making phone calls through Redphone, and you kind of have to jack up the volume. If you're the kind of person who uses volume on high all the time, you might be disappointed that you can't crank it to 11. Also PGP, I believe Aaron Topons is probably doing a key signing party here again, because he's always the guy who does it. If you would like your emails to be secure, this is the way to do it. I had a discussion with some people a couple of months ago about how email really works, and they were surprised to think that their email could be hijacked in between when they send it and the person receives it. Email, unless you encrypt it with PGP, is plain text, and it can be read by anyone across the wire. And if someone is performing a man-in-the-middle attack like the one that I performed last hour, they can absolutely read all of those things. So PGP or GPG are great products. We also talked about OptiPNG last time and JPEG Optim, and those are great optimization tools, but they also do something called removing metadata. We talked about the Rhinos. Does anyone remember the Rhinos last time? So they found that people were taking pictures of the very endangered white rhino out in Africa and uploading them to various web services. And unless you turn it off on your phone, a lot of phones by default GPS stamp your pictures, which is really cool because you can remember where you were and go back to that same spot where you proposed or whatever, and you can have that kind of history. The only problem is that the poachers realized that they could take the pictures that people were taking of rhinos and figure out where the rhinos were and track the rhinos by using other people crowdsourcing it. Kind of a cool idea. The downside to that is that the rhinos were in danger, and so signs like this were put up there. Please turn off your geotag function. There was a news report done a while back, I think by KSL, about how this can be used to track your teenagers too. And if you don't think that's scary, you must not have a teenager, because that's really scary. This can track you on your vacation when you're taking pictures and posting them to Instagram or whatever. A lot of services since last year have done some great improvements to remove metadata from the pictures that you upload, like Facebook and Twitter and things like that. So they're not publicly available, but that doesn't mean that Twitter and Facebook aren't trying to get that data from you anyway. So I would recommend removing them before you upload them at all. Then one thing we didn't talk about last time, but I'm adding in here now, a tool called ffmpeg, which is like the ultimate video command line tool of all time. It's super cool, but it also allows you to remove metadata from videos. And so if you take a video with your GoPro, which also has GPS on it, a lot of those kinds of things can be embedded into your video, or whatever other device you choose to use, although GoPro is very cool. You can use this kind of tool to rip out the metadata so that those kinds of things aren't available. Obviously the map metadata or the GPS isn't the only thing in there, but you should explore using that to be able to make those kinds of improvements. And then we talked a bit about ObscureCam, that takes your pictures and makes it so that Facebook and others can't do facial recognition on your pictures. That might be something that you care about, it might not, but facial recognition is here and it's now, so it's kind of a big deal. All right, so
Sorry, what was the program for that?
it's called ObscureCam. It's part of the Guardian project. If you go to guardianproject.info, they've got a lot of really great privacy things that they've put out. I talked about that a little bit last year. You got that? We good? Any other questions before I move on? Okay, so pretty much all the stuff that we talked about so far have been things that we talked about last year. So let's get to the good stuff, the new additions. Web encryption. With people like Verizon injecting stuff into your headers, you want to be using TLS or SSL or HTTPS wherever you can. There's a browser add-on called HTTPS Everywhere. I believe it's by the EFF. So it's a great add-on. There's only one real challenge to that. It's kind of a whitelist. And that's a little bit annoying, because you want to be able to use that for everything. But it's a difficult challenge to solve, because apparently there are a number of websites out there that didn't get the memo that HTTPS is how things work, and you shouldn't be transmitting traffic insecurely. So there's another browser add-on called HTTP Nowhere. I've used it. It's great, except for they take the blacklist approach, which is everything is HTTPS, and nothing is HTTP ever. And the only way for you to get to an HTTP site is to disable the add-on when you're going to that site. I would like to see a kind of middle ground where you get the HTTP Nowhere, where it automatically redirects you to HTTPS all the time, and then in the event that the site does not support HTTPS, it asks you if you would like to proceed to the site. That would be really cool. I filled out a bug, and I don't know that they've made any movement on that yet. But either one of these add-ons, I think, is a great idea. The more traffic you can put over HTTPS, the better. There are a lot of sites out there that still don't support HTTPS, and my goodness, we just need to put some pressure on those people to start doing the right thing, because it is bad news. For searching, how many of you still use Google?
We wouldn't have to.
A lot of you. So there are a couple of different search engines that I would recommend. One is DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo is an open source search engine. You can actually look at the source code and you can contribute to the source code, and you should, because it's great. The source code for that is available at, I think, one of their developer sites. I can't remember the URL. I'm sorry. But DuckDuckGo is a privacy-based search engine that doesn't record you and your actions. How many of you have actually looked at like your Google profile that Google has figured out about you? Too scary? You don't want to do that? You're not going to go there?
Do you really want to know?
What's that? I think you can go into your Google account settings and just look at your Google history or your Google profile. I can't remember. But for a lot of people, it can tell you your age, your gender, the part of the world that you live in, and the things that you're interested in with a scary degree of accuracy. So using something like DuckDuckGo as an alternative can help you to prevent that. I think you can also delete those kinds of things in Google, or request that they delete them. Maybe they don't actually delete them. My personal favorite search engine, though, is StartPage.com. How many of you use StartPage? 2 of you. It's cool. It uses the same kinds of metadata for searches that Google does, so it looks a lot like Google. It just doesn't track you. And that's kind of advantageous, yes?
StartPage actually uses Google.
Right.
They anonymize your data and then push it through Google's search engine.
And one of the differences between the way that you're making that request through StartPage as opposed to just making that through Google is you're not going to get personalized or localized results in the things that you're trying to do. If you're looking for a local pizza parlor, going through StartPage probably isn't the right thing for you, because you actually want Google to do all that extra effort, track you on your location, and find a pizza parlor that's a block away. StartPage will probably find something much farther away that you don't really want. Yes?
Another cool feature is that you can use it to proxy. You can actually view HTTP pages through StartPage's own proxy.
Yeah, the IESCrypt.com, I believe, is the proxy that they've got. I believe they're in Denmark. Somewhere around there. Don't quote me on that. I don't know for sure. But yes, they have their own proxy. So if you are searching for something that you don't want to have tracked, and then you want to preview some of those pages, you can also use their proxy. It doesn't go levels deep, though. So you can search for something, open that page up with the proxy, and then any link that you click on from that proxy, it will warn you that you're navigating away from the proxy and your information can be tracked again. All right. Next, OpenDNS. How many of you have used OpenDNS? Oh, I expected way more hands in here. OpenDNS is great for a couple of reasons. It kind of eliminates a lot of the tracking mechanisms that you could have. Gives you a little bit more control. There are paid parts of that product. They can also include some malware blocking and parental control. If you want to set it up so that your children can't access certain things, then you can do that. By default, they have a standardized service, and then they have a filtering service that blocks out things like phishing and what they call inappropriate content, which is always an interesting discussion to figure out what people think is inappropriate. And you can do any of those two things by just switching the DNS servers on your router or on your individual computer to the OpenDNS name server locations and numbers. If you would like a more customized solution where you can block certain sites or track certain things, you can do that by requesting and signing up for one of their paid services. When you do so, your privacy is kind of in their hands because they require you to give out your information to register for an account. Their privacy policy is actually quite good, but you should know that that's one of the things that you must do to be able to get more of the customization features. Yes, Curtis?
How was the essay?
Oh, okay. Any other questions? I guess there's also one other thing that I'd like to mention about OpenDNS, and that is the way that they've implemented their DNS is kind of a global cache, and they suggest that the way that they've done so makes it faster for you to be able to make those DNS requests. In general, OpenDNS is probably faster than your ISP, maybe not necessarily faster than Google if you're set to 8.8.8.8, which I'm guessing probably a lot of you are, maybe not even with knowing it. It's probably about the same. DNS is actually mostly fast, but really scary. One of these days we'll implement the secure version of that and it'll be way better. How many have used off-the-record messaging? OTR? Not a lot. So OTR is a plugin that you can use with a lot of different messaging applications. If you use Pigeon or Adium or a number of those things, some of those already have it built in. OTR is great because it encrypts things. It's not so great because it's kind of problematic to use. I use it every day, and I get a number of people complaining to me because they can't reach me, they can't send a message to me because the encryption is just not lining up and there's no message to say, hey, that didn't work. The good news is that it is end-to-end encryption once the connection is established. So OTR is kind of worth it, I think, in a lot of ways. I use it even though it's problematic. One day when they have something better, I'll probably use that. NoScript. How many of you have used this browser extension? Pretty popular. NoScript basically allows you to customize turning off JavaScript. You can enable it in individual settings. One of the major ways that your privacy is being challenged, I guess, is the way that I would put it, is through the use of JavaScript. And JavaScript is a fantastic technology that allows for these kinds of things, but it's also abused in a lot of different ways. Recently, there have been some people who have even used JavaScript in combination with HTML5 elements, like the canvas element, to do browser fingerprinting. How many of you have seen that in the wild? 2 of us. It's awesome. It's really cool. The Tor browser, if you're using that browser bundle, will notify you that someone is trying to do that and ask you if you'd like to allow it. Your typical browser will just hand over everything through that kind of mechanism. If you use something like NoScript, that can help you to prevent that. And then Mitro, I don't know what this is actually called. It's a product by Twitter that I guess they purchased and then open sourced, and I don't know that they're going to do a whole lot with it now, but it allows you to store keys and passwords and things like that. It's new and cool, and I have tried using it a little bit, and I don't know yet. I think the jury's still out for me, but it might be worth investigating to see if it helps you. There's also a Better Privacy plugin, and the Better Privacy plugin is kind of a terrible name for this plugin, but it allows you to have a little bit better control over the local storage objects and Flash shared objects and things like that. How many of you knew that Flash had its own location for cookies and things like that? Larger portion. How many of you know how to delete those things? Yeah, like one of you, right? You have to go to some special page on Adobe's site, and Adobe's site uses this thing to like get into your computer and allow you to disable it or delete those or something like that. Or you have to like Google around for 25 minutes to figure out where those files are located on your hard drive and go delete them, right? Those are all just a giant pain, and it's silly that we have to do that. So someone created this Better Privacy plugin to kind of automate that for you and be able to delete those kinds of things. It's really cool. I believe that this one does have some issues with its nature of being current and maintenance on this. I don't know that someone's actively maintaining this project, but I don't know for sure. Spider Oak? Yes?
No, preemptive raise hand to say I use it.
You use it? So how does it work for you?
Awesome. I've got it on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and encrypted storage, they have zero knowledge of what I store on my backup. I've got 100 gigs storage for like $10 a month.
Yeah, so SpiderOak is kind of like the encryption method for something like Google Drive, right? You want to be able to store your documents in the cloud, and storing your documents in the cloud is so easy and it's so convenient, and privacy is kind of an issue whenever you store something in the cloud, right? I mean, just ask every celebrity whose pictures were stored in the cloud. It's a problem. But if you encrypt your files before they go to the cloud, and the place where you're storing them has essentially what's called zero knowledge about that, you're storing an encrypted something. They don't know whether it's a picture or a document or a video, although file sizes might help you to determine those kinds of things. But they can't tell exactly what that file is because they really don't know. And essentially that is what privacy is, right? Being able to say, I want you to put this in my bank storage vault. There are two ways to do that, right? You can say, I want you to put my diamonds in the storage vault, or you say, I just want to rent a storage vault. You go into a closed room, you put in your thing, and you close it up. Nobody needs to know what's in there. That's what SpiderOak is. It's a place for you to store stuff where nobody needs to know what's in there. Any other comments about SpiderOak? There are also some other things that allow you to do that kind of stuff using Google Drive and others, and I haven't necessarily had any experience with that. And then Gorilla Mail. How many have used Gorilla Mail? Nobody. Wow, okay. Gorilla Mail is a service that allows you to set up a temporary email address and expire it when you're done. How many of you would like to use that?
Probably Hillary Clinton.
Probably Hillary Clinton, okay. Touche. Yeah, I think that at some point we're going to reach the apocalypse of I have created so many Gmail accounts that Gmail can no longer hold all of the identities that I've just created for signing up for this one thing and then throwing it away, right? Gorilla Mail gives you the opportunity to do that without having those kinds of long-lasting and far-reaching effects. And it's kind of an interesting service. I haven't had a ton of experience with it, but it's worth trying. And then other places that you can go to get some help, obviously the EFF. They're here today if you want to donate with them or talk to some of the people that are here. Privacy.org, and I'd like to point out again, still no HTTPS here, which is just silly. Epic.org and the GuardianProject.info. All of those places are great ways to get some more information about tools that you can use to maintain your privacy. The EFF in particular has a number of write-ups where people have come up with ways for you to protect your privacy in certain scenarios that could be helpful. For example, if you're traveling and you might be stuck at a border crossing or something and they have to search all of your stuff, how do you encrypt your things in advance so that you know? Or if you're going to join the protests in Baltimore, then how do you make sure that you're not being tracked by this or that? Which I'm not either advocating or showing a method of dissent. You should make that choice, but you should be able to maintain your own privacy while you're doing those kinds of things, and they have great write-ups for that. Let's see. I think that's all of the content that I have for you today. Does anyone have any questions? Or yes?
So in a case where someone's just barely getting into looking at privacy, all their stuff's already out there, how much is it going to hurt us to have everything already out there and then start? Like, is it still going to be pretty, or just...
So the answer to that is, I don't know. It's really tricky. In the event that you already have information out there, the internet is kind of one of those things that's forever. And there's very little that you can do to erase any content that you might have. You can go to services like Google and request that they remove that kind of information. You can go to Facebook and request that they remove your account, and maybe they'll comply. But being able to keep that in mind going forward, I think, is an advantage. Facebook does things as far as privacy is concerned with actually tracking the things that you start to type and then you don't actually post. They still store all of those things on their server. And so giving it a little bit of thought, I think, is important. being able to understand that you can take charge now. Obviously, some of it is the cat is out of the bag, so to speak. You know, there's not a whole lot that you can do with the things that are already out there. But being able to make the decision yourself from here on is important. And maybe you need to take baby steps, you know, do the thing that you can do now. If you can change from using Google as your search engine to use something else, and that's the one thing that you can do today, go do it. It's not going to hurt you. I think you'll find that if you use something like DuckDuckGo or StartPage, that you'll get probably about the same results, and you'll be just as happy with it, but nobody will be tracking you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good.
Any other questions? Yes?
Secure VPN providers. Do you have any recommendations?
I don't. I mean, there are lots of great ones out there, but you're going to run into issues where, as you're trying to do secure VPN kinds of things, that there are lots of places out there, and a lot of them are very small places, and it's really hard to find a stellar recommendation from someone that you trust unless you know someone who has a great idea, and I'm unfortunately not the person to give you that particular recommendation. So I'm sorry. Any other questions? Yes?
As far as two of the plugins you mentioned, Adblock Plus and Gostrey, Adblock Plus, like you said, does allow certain types of ads through. But there's an alternate project that's also open source called uBlock or MicroBlock, the mu symbol, that I recently switched to within the last 2 weeks, and its performance has been a lot better for me, and it also has a lot more extensive list of tracking services, analytics, and things like that you can block as well.
Yeah, and MicroBlock has been kind of an up-and-coming member of that for a while. Things like Gostrey and Adblock Plus, you should know they try to make money off of improving advertising. And there are two considerations that I think are important as far as that discussion goes. One is both of those products, I think by default, try to opt you in to those kinds of services, or at least present you initially with, you should choose this. You don't have to. You can choose to not send your data to Gostrey or to Adblock Plus, or to allow certain ads to come through. There's a checkbox in both of those services. I've used them both, and I've unchecked them both. But you can absolutely make that decision. The other one is, if you want to improve the way that advertising works, using something like Adblock Plus and Gostrey to give more information to the people who are doing advertising to say, I would like you to move advertising in this direction, could be an advantage to you as a consumer. That's really something that you're going to have to make a decision for yourself. I can't make that decision for you or tell you how you should think in that regard, nor would I desire to do so, but it is certainly a consideration, so thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you very much.